some of this is going to make sense to you, and then some of these different hats that the president wears is going to look a little bit confusing to you. Like, for example, he's in the executive branch, but we call the president the chief legislator. Okay, so it's kind of unique. Have all of you got your notes pulled up? I sent you the notes page. You have to open it through Cami and be able to write on it. And we'll add some stuff to it. But make sure you open it. I'll get started here.
The only name I've heard is Commander-in-Chief.
Yeah, that's one of them. There's actually 8 of them that we're going to discuss and make sure you guys have a little bit of information about. Now, the way your notes are set up, or the way your handout that I gave you is set up, is it has all the different names of the president listed at the bottom of the paper. Have any of you opened it yet? Where it says Chief of State, Chief Executive, Chief Administrator, Chief Diplomat. Y'all see all that? Mm-hmm. And then out beside of it, it's got what they're called. I'm actually going to give you the full-blown definition, and I'm going to write it out for the guys that's online because they can't see us filling this out today. Does that make sense? I would urge you to write it out too, but if you just want to click A, B, C, or D over here on the side, that's fine. But I'll get into more detail within your notes, okay? So, first off, as far as the objectives goes with this section, we're going to describe the president's many roles. Then we're going to talk about the formal qualifications necessary to become the president, as in how old you have to be, how long you have to be a citizen, where you have to live, things of that nature. And then explain how the president's term of office has changed over time. You guys know how many terms the president's allowed to be in office?
2.
He's allowed 2. Have we had any presidents before ever served more than 2?
No.
Yes, we have. FDR was actually in his 4th term when he passed away. So up to that point in time, there was nothing in the Constitution suggesting that you only had to serve 2 terms. George Washington served 2 terms because that's what he wanted to do. And he simply said at the end of it, nobody should serve more than this because you would become corrupt or whatever.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the president's pay and benefits. Believe it or not, they make money, and it's not as much money as you probably think the president makes.
I think it's like $100 some odd thousand.
No, it's a little bit more than that. I know you guys noticed Donald Trump. He's like gave away all of his to like certain parts of the government, things of that nature. But anyway, so as far as the different names of the president, they are located right here. Okay, so if you'll notice, it says Chief of State, Chief Executive, Chief Administrator, Diplomat, Commander-in-Chief, Chief Legislator, and Chief Citizen. Now, the one that you guys have heard the most of is Commander-in-Chief. When the president is acting as the Commander-in-Chief, what does he mean? He's in charge of what? Anybody know?
Armed Forces.
The armed forces, the military. But other than that, you probably haven't heard a lot of these. So I'm actually going to start at number 7 on this, okay? And I'm going to write this out again for the people online. So it may take a few minutes, but if you're writing them out, it'll make a lot more sense too. So at the bottom there, you got the Chief of State. So what we're talking about is the president's roles, guys, okay? The presidential roles, so to speak. The first one being the Chief of State. Now, your notes suggest that the Chief of State, it says there's a ceremonial head of the government. So I'm going to go ahead and jot that down. But what do you think that means? Ceremonial head of the government. You don't have a comment, Zane? You always have a comment.
What's that?
What do you think I mean by calling the president the ceremonial head of the government?
He's the one person that you would think of when you think about the American government.
Yeah, when you think, you're exactly right. When you think of the American government, the American form of government, the first person that most of the time comes to your brain is the President of the United States, right? He's the ceremonial leader of the government. I look at it like this too. when people come from other countries here, like regardless of where it's from, when they come here, do they come here to, like if they're from a political standpoint, if it's from another country come here from a political standpoint, do they come here to talk to our Congress or to our judicial system or anything of that nature? No, that you see them with the president, right? He's the ceremonial leader of the government. He is the symbol of the U.S. government. So that's the part I would write down. Underneath ceremonial head of government, I would put down that he is the symbol, or she, whenever that happens, symbol of the U.S. government. So basically, other nations view American citizens how they view our president. Okay, and obviously that's good sometimes, not so good other times, right? But that's who they think of, that's who they see. All right. So if you look at the bottom of your paper in number 7, where it says Chief of State, which one of those over to the right would correspond with that? Be letter B, where it says ceremonial head of the government. So if I were to ask you, what is the president acting like as a ceremonial head of government? You'd tell me he's being the chief of what? State. That's the other handout I sent to you. Looks like this. It should be in the screen.
The same.
Same, yeah. Like remove that and go back to your stream. See the one beside of it? Open it with Cami and you can write on it. So number 7 is letter B. Everybody good with the chief of state? Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, the second one that we're going to deal with is called the chief executive. Okay? The chief executive. Now, this one should be common sense. What branch of government is the president located in? The executive branch. So, obviously, he is the leader of the executive branch. And I'm going to abbreviate that. All right. It says that he is the holder of executive power under the Constitution. Now, what do you think executive power is? All right, there's a couple things the president can do simply because he is the president, okay? For example, let's say that the president wants Congress to pass something that he really thinks is necessary, and Congress says no for whatever reason, financial reasons, or they just simply don't like it. The president can enact that. He can make that go into effect by issuing what they call an executive order, okay? So he has the ability to make a law, even though Congress doesn't want it to be a law, through executive order. Now here's the catch. There's a difference between an actual law and an executive order. If Congress approves a law and the president signs off on that law, it's a law forever. You guys understand that? If the president enacts an executive order, that executive order is in effect until that president leaves office. Then the next president can do with it what he may. He may want to keep it, he may remove it, but he has the ability to do that because it's not a set in stone law. A good example of that is Obamacare. Obama really wanted a health insurance, right? Not a lot of people thought that was a good idea. So he enacted it as an executive order. When President Trump got into office, one of the first things he did was do what?
Get rid of it.
He removed Obamacare, or the Health Care Act. He could do that because it was an executive order. It wasn't a law. But the chief executive has the power to do that because of executive power. So if you look at the bottom of your paper, number 8, which one suggests that he is the leader of the executive branch and holds executive power? The way that this one's written is a little bit different. You're going to have to remember what the executive branch does. You guys remember early in the class I said the legislative branch makes the laws. The judicial branch interprets the laws. What is it that the executive would do? They carry them out, right? So, number 8 is letter H. The president helps carry out laws. Or he makes sure that the nation's laws are carried out. All right. Now, again, I'm adding stuff to this, so have it in your brain, okay? The third one that we're going to deal with. It says the chief administrator here. So you got the chief admin. Now, if you're an administrator, you basically run things because you're at the top of it, right? You are setting the course for whatever action your group or your company or your business is going to use. You guys understand that? So as the president does that, is he's acting as the chief administrator. All he's actually doing is he is the director of the executive branch. He is directing which way the executive branch is going to do things. All right? So he's the director of the executive branch. Which one do you think that is on your paper? Yeah, that is letter D. Number 9 is letter D, where it said he's the head of the federal bureaucracy. Bureaucracy, guys, is just another word for government. Okay? He's the head of the federal bureaucracy. So far, so simple. I think this is pretty easy stuff, don't you guys? All right, the last one on this page is called a chief diplomat. Chief diplomat. You guys know what a diplomat is?
No.
All right, look at it like this. Do we have people that are American that live in other countries that work for our government?
Yep.
Yes. Some people call them ambassadors, but we have diplomats, right?
And we got spies.
And these diplomats basically work with other countries and our government to keep relations good. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So, what I mean by chief diplomat is if someone from another country is a diplomat that comes to the United States, who they come in to see? The president, to try to work out whatever issues we may have with other countries. Y'all get that? Diplomat means other countries. So beside a chief diplomat, it says that the president is the main architect of the nation's foreign policy. So just write down that he makes the nation's foreign policy. And then which one would that be? That would be letter E, determines foreign policy. So we just did 4 of these, and obviously the president has a lot going on, right? And we've not even talked about 4 of them. Okay, we're just halfway through. Any questions on those 4? Makes sense? All right, the 5th one we got here, excuse me, is the commander-in-chief. This is the one you guys have heard quite a lot about. So you have the commander-in-chief.
So do you have to go to college to be president?
Not necessarily, it helps. That is not one of the formal qualifications, but I mean, they're not going to hire just any average Joe Schmo.
They might.
Could. Look at Mr. Trump. He didn't have any political background. So, this one you guys should know. When the president is acting as the commander-in-chief, he's in charge of what? Or he is leading the nation's what? Armed forces. Now, can the president send troops wherever he wants to send them?
Yes.
He technically can, but he can't act in a war-like mentality until who approves war? Congress, right? So he can send military personnel wherever he wants to across the world, but they cannot act in a militaristic style until Congress has proposed. Now, granted, I'm sure if we sent troops somewhere and they got to be fired upon, I would find it pretty necessary that they shoot back, even if it's not approved. You know what I mean? But he is the leader of the nation's armed forces, so they kind of go where he wants them to go and does what he needs them to do, which is, that's a lot of responsibility. Okay. The 6th one here, being a chief legislator, this is the one that throws people off. And this is the one you guys will miss on your test if you don't pay attention right here. So, Zane, focus for a minute.
I'm focusing.
The president is the member of the executive branch, right?
Yep.
So why would I call him the chief of another branch? I already told you they don't spill into one another. They all have the same amount of power. So what is the president doing to be the chief legislator? It says that he's a nation's public. Excuse me, I didn't answer the commander-in-chief one on your paper. Number 11, what letter goes with it? G. That would be commands the armed forces. Sorry about that. So now, as the chief legislator, how does the president have any involvement in the lawmaking process? Because that's what Congress does. They're in the legislative branch. It says that he is the leader or the main author of the nation's public policy. Public policy is just laws. What does he have to sign? Once Congress approves it, who has to sign a bill into law? The president, right? He's the only human on earth or in America that can sign something and make it law in the United States. You guys understand that? So, where he's acting as the chief legislator, put down that he is the author of public policy. And again, guys, that's just laws. Now, here's a question for you. Can Congress pass a law if the president vetoes it? What do you think, Zane? Zane, what do you think?
What's up?
Can Congress pass a law if the president vetoes it?
No.
You don't think so? You never heard of a presidential or a override, presidential or veto, override and veto?
They could, but
They could, highly unlikely, but they could, right? But for the most part, the president, where he signs bills into law,
yeah.
he is the chief legislator. So beside the chief legislator, what letter we got down there? Anybody know?
A.
That would be letter A. And then the last two are pretty self-explanatory. The chief of party. The president is in charge of his political party. Right now, the Republicans are in office, right? Because President Trump's a Republican. Therefore, he is the leader of the Republican Party. So I would just put down that leads the controlling political party. And what I mean by controlling is the people controlling the executive branch. Leader of controlling political party. And then the last one, and then on your paper, that's letter F, leads his or her political party for number 13. And then the last one, the chief citizen, we've kind of touched on this already. But people from the outside of the U.S., when they look at the U.S. and the citizens and things of that nature, how things are going, they look toward the leader of our country, which is the president. So he is the representative of all people. Or he's actually the representative of American citizens. Now, I'm sure some citizens would argue with you over that because they're not President Trump fans, but I'm sure there's also people that would argue when President Obama was in office that they didn't, he didn't represent what they thought. But either way, it's a back and forth thing. So those are the 8 characteristics or presidential roles that we have. You're going to need to know each of those because you're going to have a quiz probably on Thursday because I'm going to have section 2 in your notes tomorrow. And I'll ask you what each one of these are. It'll be a matching situation. So you'll have to put A, B, C, D, and I'll have it mixed up from what you have on your paper now. So does anybody have any questions about that part? We good there?
Yes, sir.
All right, then let's just go back up to the top and fill out that box. It's talking about formal qualifications for the president. This is fairly easy stuff, in my opinion. Formal qualification. First thing is beside of age. Do any of you know how old you have to be in order to be the president of the United States?
Above 35.
You got to be at least 35 years old. So in that little box, it's right here. President must be at least 35 years old.
I'll make it to that age.
Does anybody in here know who the youngest president we've ever had is?
Obama.
No.
JFK.
JFK was the youngest president. that we've ever had. Does anybody know who the oldest president is we've ever had?
Trump.
Trump. He's like 77, believe it or not. He's older.
What if Bernie got in? And then we would definitely.
Well, I
put Bernie
think,
in there.
is Joe Biden older than Trump? I know they're fairly close. I don't know who's
Sure
older.
is.
Joe Biden's ancient. He's like 82.
Well, I don't know. I'm
His
sure
brain's
whichever
like
one wins the
100 years old.
election in November. Don't make fun. So, you have to be at least 35 years old. The next formal qualification we have here is citizenship. What that means is, what type of citizen do you have to be the president? Now, this gets somewhat confusing, so listen to what I'm saying. Beside the number 2, put down that you must have been born a U.S. citizen. Okay? So, beside of citizenship, put down that you must have been born . Now, with that being said, do any of you know how many ways there are to become a U.S. citizen?
You can be born into it.
Obviously, being born in America makes you a U.S. citizen. That's how the majority of us probably became U.S. citizens.
Yep.
The other way is through a process called naturalization, and there's a few steps to it. But basically, you go through, and once you complete the naturalization process, you become a citizen. That's part of it. But a naturalized citizen cannot run for president.
Nope.
And the reason I bring that up is because the governor of California a few years ago was Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? He is a naturalized citizen. So he could be the governor. You guys with me? But people were like, well, he needs to run for president, as a joke, I think. But, I mean, he actually done a pretty decent job in California, in my opinion. But he can't run for the president because he wasn't born in the U.S., okay? So you have to be a natural-born citizen. You can't be naturalized, if that makes y'all understand me there. So, you have to be born in the U.S., you have to be at least 35 years old. Then number 3 there says as a U.S. resident. So basically, how long do you have to live in the U.S.? Now this one is where people get confused because of what I just told you about citizenship. You have to be a U.S. resident, put down for at least 14 years. Okay? So you would have to have lived in America for at least 14 years. So what I'm getting at there is this. If you're born in America and you move to another country, say your parents moved to Cuba or whatever, and you live there until you're 30, and then you come back to the United States, you can't run for president until you're 44 because you have to be here for 14 years. Has everybody got me? So just so y'all know, I meet all 3 of those qualifications. So if and when I run for president, appreciate it if you'd vote for me. All right. So again, you got to be 35 years old, a natural-born U.S. citizen, and be a resident for at least 14 years. So far, so simple.
Yes, sir.
All right. Terms in office. A few moments ago, you guys answered and says you can serve 2 terms in office, but that has not always been the case. It says the Constitution sets no term limits for the presidency. So your notes are suggesting that in the Constitution, there's nothing written down saying you can only serve 2 terms. It became a custom after George Washington done it. Okay. Franklin Roosevelt broke that custom. He was elected to 4 terms from 1932 to 1944. Roosevelt was fantastic. Does anybody know what he got us out of? Did any of you guys choose Roosevelt for your presidential project? Good call. Does anybody know what he created to get us out of a huge mess? What happened in 1929? Anybody remember? Yeah, the stock market fell, right? People lost a lot of things, basically lost everything. FDR is credited with creating a ton of jobs and getting the country moving again. Okay? So he was absolutely loved by everybody. So that's why he stayed so long. But he passed away, I think it was from polio, if I remember correctly, in 1944. So, but in 1944, we added the 22nd Amendment. Does anybody know what the 22nd Amendment done? You're going to need to know this, so jot it down somewhere on your paper because I don't have it on your notes. And the people listening online need to hear this too. You need to know that the 22nd Amendment put a term limit on the president. You can only serve 2 elected terms. That's how I would write it. The 22nd Amendment says you can only serve 2 elected terms. Now, number 4 is asking you maximum term length. Now, just with the information that I have given you, you would think that's in how many years? 2 terms equals how many years? 8. But that's not the maximum term length. Okay? If you'll notice what's next up there, it says, if a president succeeds to the office after the middle of a term, he or she can still seek 2 full terms. So basically what they're suggesting there is if the vice president takes over after the halfway point of a term, then that individual can still try to be elected to 2 terms. You guys understand that? Now, let's say, for example, that I took over in the first year or the second year for a president. Can I seek 2 full terms after that? No. Here's why. Beside of maximum term length, put down 10 years. That is the answer to number 4. 10 years is the maximum term length. And here's how you get to 10 years. If a president passes away at the midway point of one of his terms, and the vice president takes over for 2 years, if he's elected again, he can have 4 more years, right? 2 plus 4 is 6. He can actually run again, and that makes 10, right? Now let's say that with JFK's situation, I think he was killed in his 2nd year in office. Lyndon Johnson takes over. Lyndon Johnson serves 3 years and then wins an election. Serves 4 years. That means he serves a total of 7 years. Can he run for re-election? No, because that would put him over the 10-year term. Does that make sense? So it's a maximum of 10 years.
So
Okay.
if Mike Pence were to take over right now, he can only serve one more term.
If Mike Pence were to take over right now, he could run for re-election twice, because he's only going to serve out, 3 months of President Trump's first term? You know what I'm saying? So, no more than 10 years. That's the length. The next question you got on this is annual salary. Now, this is a little different now, but from our purposes, this is the number I need you to remember. Does anybody know how much money the president makes annually? It's not as much as what you'd think. You know, I mean, he's running the country. You would think it would be millions of dollars, right? Yeah, it's $400,000. The president makes $400,000. Okay. So each year, and this was set in 2001, they make $400,000. Now the next question, it says annual expenses. Put down $50,000 for it. So basically, the president gets $50,000 where he can blow it on anything he wants to. That's kind of his bonus expense paycheck. Does that make sense? The $400,000 is his annual salary. But if you take into consideration all the fringe benefits that the president has, y'all know what a fringe benefit is? Fringe benefit would be like working for a company and they let you drive a car. You know, you're not wasting your gas to get to work. A fringe benefit with the school system is when we got to make copies, they provide that for us. You know, we don't have to pay for that. So the president has a ton of fringe benefits. And what I mean by that is he has access to multiple things. He has the White House that he lives in. He has a plane that flies him wherever he wants to go. He has Camp David, which is a vacation retreat. All kinds of cars, a huge staff, many offices. He will never pay for health care again in his life, and all other things. So and he'll also have security for the rest of his life. Until the day he dies, he'll have Secret Service working for him. Okay, which is pretty neat. Okay, so obviously that $400,000 doesn't sound like a tremendous amount of money, but when you take into consideration all the other things he gets, it's a pretty neat deal. Okay, so that's literally section 1 of chapter 13 and all the different ideas that the president had, the different roles the president uses. Does anybody have any type of questions about that? Does that make sense? All right, you guys got about 30 minutes left in class, so you can use that time to work on your presidential project. Okay, so go ahead and get started on that.